Hello, fifth graders, and welcome to your language arts lesson for today. For today, you will need your language arts binder or materials packet. Whether you have a binder or materials packet, you'll need to get that. Our objective for today is going to be reviewing for this quarter 3 exam. And really, I'm going to just do, it's going to be pretty short today. I'm just going to guide you through some of the things that you will need to know for that quarter 3 exam, and then your work for today is to really study for this upcoming exam, okay? Which is going to be on Monday. So you've got like the long weekend, right? Remember, we don't have any new work. I mean, tomorrow is Wednesday, so we have actually no, we canceled our check-ins too. So really, there's no new work on tomorrow or Thursday or Friday, and then the weekend. So you've got a long time to really make sure you're well prepared for this upcoming test. So you should be finding in either your binder or your wherever you kept your materials that you picked up your third interim assessment study guide. So I'm going to flip you around and we're really just going to do kind of a walkthrough of this information. Thank you for your patience while I adjust. Okay, so literary devices. You're going to, it's always good, and this is kind of our back to the beginning of the year. We're going to be making sure we can match or know the definitions of these literary devices. So remembering that dramatic story arc is the plot of the story, that mood is the emotion or tone that the author wants to create for the reader, that theme is a story's main idea or unifying message, that foreshadowing occurs when the author gives a hint about something that will happen later in the story, and that hubris is excessive pride that eventually brings about a character's downfall. Some of you guys pointed out that Casey seems to demonstrate some hubris, and I thought that was an amazing connection, right? There was a little bit of this overconfidence from him, and then ultimately we do see there's this downfall in the form of him striking out. So that was an amazing connection. I actually made a note to myself. I need to build that into my lessons next year. It was such a great connection. Okay, dramatic story arc. We need to make sure that we remember that the setting or exposition of a story is made up of the background information that's necessary for understanding the story. That the rising action is made up of the events that build the tension of the story's primary conflict. The climax is the highest point of tension in the story because it's the moment immediately before the reader finds out the fate of the main character. This is something that's been giving us a little bit of trouble still. Remember, the climax should not be the moment when we know the fate, okay? A lot of you, when you were doing your Casey at the Bat homework, selected Mighty Casey has struck out. That can't be the climax because we know the fate of the main character at that point, right? He struck out. That's it. The climax should come before we learn the fate of the main character. Okay, so remember when we've been working on plotting dramatic story arc, we've actually been starting, I've been instructing you to find the falling action first, right? This is when we see the events that are reducing the story's conflict, and it's because we know what has happened. So the climax should be right before we know the fate of our main character. And then the resolution, right? This is when we find that all or most of the conflicts are resolved and the characters' lives return to normal, okay? So again, being really familiar with these definitions and also remembering what I just said about how we identify the climax, okay? And again, I hear, this is the last time we wonder, the climax is the last time we wonder what is going to happen to a main character, okay? Inferences, we've been working on inferences, right? So remember, when an author doesn't explicitly state something, we use inference. So we look at the clues from the text to determine a reasonable explanation about what is happening in the story. So it's like an educated guess about what we don't know based on evidence from the text that we do know. And you all have been actually selecting quotes and then explaining how the quotes support your opinion, your inference. You did this a lot with I Like to See It Lap the Miles and A Narrow Fellow in the Grass, which was great. For the most part, you guys did a really excellent job with this, being able to select quotes and then explain how that quote supports your inference. So something else that you should be familiar with. Okay, poetry concepts. We want to make sure we're familiar with rhyme scheme, and you can expect that I'm going to ask you to identify rhyme schemes. So some poems have rhyme schemes, and remember, we determine this by looking at the last word of every line. Lines that rhyme are assigned the same letter. The number of letters in a rhyme scheme should match the number of lines in a stanza. And not every poem has a rhyme scheme. My hope, fifth graders, is that you are very, very comfortable with this by now. We've done this for every single poem that we've read in our poetry unit. We've looked at identifying rhyme scheme. And of course, remembering that a valid answer can be, there is no rhyme scheme. Okay. Personification. So this occurs when something that is not human is described as doing human things. So this example is the wind whispered through the leaves. So not only should you be able to identify examples of personification, but also, just like we've done in our homework repeatedly, you should be able to explain how something is an example of personification. I'm going to be honest, this has been something that has been tricky for fifth graders, the explaining how an example of personification, why, excuse me, it is personification. It's really about putting the definition into your answer. We did it in a lot of lessons. We did it in woman work. We did it in I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. So those would be great videos to go back to in order to review this personification and how we explain that something is an example of personification. A simile is when we compare two things using like or as. So the stars shined like diamonds in the sky, or his voice was as loud as a cannon exploding. So again, identifying an example of a simile and also being able to explain why it is an example of a simile. Again, something that we've worked on in several homework assignments and something that is a little bit tricky, but remember that when you're explaining why something is a simile, you should be referring to this definition. Okay, we should be hearing the definition in our explanation. Metaphor, this is when we describe something as being another thing. Remember what I said in one of my lessons. It's kind of like an equation, right? We're saying this is this thing, okay? Even though that's not literally true. So his words were a symphony of joy. Again, not literally true, but we're basically saying words equal a symphony, okay? And I gave the example of like Miss Burry equals a dinosaur, right? And it's a statement of my age, okay? Because I'm 147. I don't know if you know that about me. I've aged really gracefully. So we're looking at this equation. And again, identifying a metaphor and also explaining why it is a metaphor. So Mother to Son was a poem in which we talked about metaphor. All the World's a Stage. These are homework assignments, video lessons that you can go back to remind yourself how we worked on this, how we practice this, and a part of your studying process. Poem titles, we need to remember that poem titles should follow our capitalization rules, which remember the capitalization rules for poem titles is you capitalize the first word, you capitalize the last word, and you capitalize all important words. And important words are going to be most words. These unimportant words are going to be conjunctions and articles that are 3 letters or fewer. Okay, so yes, we need to make sure our poems are capitalized. And then also the quotation marks, which is something we've practiced again and again. So hopefully you're feeling very familiar with that as well. I didn't add this, but I should have. You want to also be familiar with dictionary entries, okay? So remember the work that we've been doing throughout our poetry introduction went through all of these parts of a dictionary, right? So that would be another thing that you could review is our poetry introduction to remind yourself about dictionary entries. Also, if you're struggling with identifying rhyme scheme, that's the lesson to go back to as well, right? Is this poetry introduction. Finally, strong test answers. Remember, if given a short answer, you always want to use as many words from the question in your answer as possible, just like I asked you to do on your homework, okay? Remember, when asked for a quote, you want to be using the author's exact words. So it's not you kind of paraphrasing what the author's saying. You want to be writing down exact words of the author, which you have been asked to do on almost every single language arts assignment. So you should be pretty familiar with that. And then finally, this piece where if you're asked to provide textual evidence and explain, you want to add that explanation, right? Remember, you want to put that in your answer. So, fifth graders, it's kind of a lot. But you also, like I said, have a fair amount of time. You have your homework today is really to review for the test. I mean, you've watched this video and kind of started thinking about that, but flashcards, maybe. I've referred to a lot of lessons that you could go back to remind yourself about how to answer questions like these, the types of questions that we've been practicing throughout. There are notes that you can take a look at. So all of these things are great tools to use to study. If I were you, I know for me, I've made both sets of mistakes in my life. Well, not both sets of mistakes. I've made the one that's a mistake and then the other that's not. I have taken the approach of waiting until the night before a test and stressed myself out a lot by trying to feel like I had to cram it all in. I've made the more prudent choice where I see, oh, I've got, well, Wednesday, Thursday, I mean, honestly, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 6 days. Really prudently would be maybe spend a pretty good chunk of time today studying and then a little bit all the other days, right? Just do maybe like a 5-minute review in the next couple of days so that when it comes to Monday, you're just ready to go, right? There's not a lot of stress there. So take some time to study today. Once you're done, you can say mark is done, right? You can turn in this assignment and you'll just want to make sure that you're keeping the information fresh before the test on Monday. If you have questions about any of the things that I've said, of course, send me a message, visit office hours. We can talk through those things. But that's it for today. So good luck, fifth graders.